Right from a young boy, it was one of the things that I was always fascinated about was the Titanic disaster. It was one of those things that I think always interested me right the way through my life. And I didn't know, of course, that apparently half the rest of the world who knew remotely about it was also fascinated by this ship, which represented so much of that age. And it was very poignant to see all those artifacts and things spread across the bottom. And then this, the mightiest of moving objects that mankind had ever created, so smashed on the bottom and broken up into so many pieces. And the fascination and the puzzle about this fantastic ship that man had created. And what it shows to me is that the biblical connotation that all things turn to dust and everything runs down, well, that is about right. We see that on that ship and how it's melting away with the icicles and the attack by the various organisms that are attacking the steel and creating the rusticles, etc. And that ship has deteriorated so quickly, even since finding them, that they wonder whether it just won't be a stain on the bottom of the ocean in a couple of hundred years. As so many other ships, great ships in the past, and when we looked at Bismarck, and then we go and have a look at the Hood, and these mighty battleships, which we were so enamored with. And I remember my mother saying when she was young, and the Hood was lost to Bismarck, how the whole nation was devastated over a ship, and the focus was really on a ship. When you actually study the battles over the centuries that Britain has been involved in, if we look at, for instance, Waterloo was a very interesting case. Yahweh, the God of the Bible, says that he controls everything through the weather. And prior to the battle starting, there was an endless rainstorm, so bad that in the morning the Waterloo battlefield was nothing more than just a quagmire. And Napoleon decided to delay the battle. It was about 3 or 4 hours, hoping that the wind would dry it out and the sun would dry it out. And of course it didn't really work that way, because when the battle started, they were still having to try and maneuver these very heavy guns, which were up to their axles in mud. And they had to have not one or two men to maneuver, and they had to have 10 men or 20 men. A very difficult maneuver. And then the other part of the situation was he didn't send his cannonballs in an arc like that to land. He used to send them flat across the ground, bouncing until they hit something. So anybody between where it comes out the muzzle of the cannon and where in actual fact it finally ended up, anybody on that track was dead. But on that particular day there was so much mud around that the cannonballs just went into the mud, and so that strategy didn't work either. And of course various other strategies. And when you know a bit about the battles, Wellington actually used a trick that our friend Alexander the Great used in his battle against Rise. He in actual fact hid his cavalry, his group of men behind the hill. And when the battle started and the old guard started to move up, they were horrified to find there wasn't just a few British there. There was a whole army there, which proceeded to cut them to pieces, and they retreated. This is the power of Yahweh. This is the power that was demonstrated, where the battle became lost because of weather, and that was something that the average person does not seem to understand. But then again, have a look at the Battle of Trafalgar. If the wind had been blowing hard, it would not. We've got the cat here. if the wind had not been blowing hard, if it had been blowing hard, probably the battle wouldn't have been. Well, you couldn't have actually sailed between the ships because they would have chopped you in two. But because everybody was drifting along and the British were coming from this side and cutting it into 3 pieces, so the forward piece and the back piece, our fleet turned out to be far bigger than the Spanish-French fleet, because they chopped off 1/3, which continues to drift. And if you're in light airs, as we call it as yachtsmen, sometimes a big ship like that is an absolute beast. You can't turn it around, so you will lose the battle. And that's what they couldn't do. The front half was chopped off, and whereas that Spanish fleet was far bigger, once they lost that front third of being chopped off, we were able to cut back the 2/3 into nothing. So by the time they were able to get about, and Villeneuve, the battle was lost. And then, of course, afterwards came up a huge storm which destroyed what was left. So, and then if we look at various battles in the North Sea, for instance, the Battle of the Atlantic, we were losing it. We did not have enough ships. They were sinking more ships with their submarines than we could make, and so we couldn't keep Britain going. Suddenly, up came these huge storms that went on forever, so bad that the admiral of the German submarine fleet withdrew them back to the pens to refit them and fix them up, put more stuff in, and clean them up, and because it was useless trying to fire a torpedo at a ship if 1 minute is 60 foot in the air, the next minute is 60 foot down. And these huge waves were so massive, and these just went on and on and on. When they did get back, we had these long-range aircraft, so they had to withdraw them again and then put them in what they call the gap between us, Canada and Britain, where it was very difficult for us to patrol. We didn't have the long-range aircraft. Up came the storms again, and when they finished the storms, we had now got mini carriers, we got these long-range aircraft, and they started to lose more submarines than they could produce again. So at a critical moment, suddenly we weren't losing any more submarines. And then take the torchlight landings. When we went to Africa, and Patton went there, and they're out there, they expected to fully lose at least a third of the fleet. But when they left Britain and they came across there, they sort of were under a huge storm. And nobody saw them. The Condor aircraft, the Germans never saw the fleet. And now there didn't any submarines. It was just too bad, the weather. A lot of sick men on our ships. A lot of very sick and ill men. But boy, they got the other side in Africa, and they hadn't lost a man just about. They went ashore, where they thought they were going to lose at least a third of that fleet. When it came that we left Africa after defeating Rommel and we went to Sicily, another huge storm came up so bad that the Germans said, well, nobody's coming tonight. And it continued, and they all went into town, had a good time. We literally landed with nobody firing at us, even some of the Italians helping us ashore so that we could get us ashore. These are all historical facts. And when we went to the D-Day landings, and we had that big storm, and it was touch and go whether we did it or we didn't, and then they found they had this gap which the Germans hadn't picked up. We decided to go on that period. The German generals, etc., went back to Berlin because they knew we weren't coming. Suddenly the gunners on the Atlantic Wall, as they call them, up came a mist, and there was 1,000 ships firing at them. And even Hitler, because of some very clever work, believed it was still going to come through Calais, because that was the obvious place as far as he was concerned. He didn't even believe this; he thought this was a blind. He kept all his guns and all his tanks up there till the last moment when they realized it was a serious attack. It was too late. We were ashore, but we still had major battles. And then look at Patton at the Battle of the Bulge. He prayed to his God to change the weather, which was locked in for apparently 2 weeks. They couldn't get aircraft up. Suddenly, the very next day, the weather changed, and we had aircraft there. So if you think miracles don't happen, I could go on to Falklands and a whole lot of other incidents that we don't have time for because I'm running out of my time right now. But go to this website up here. Because of YouTube, this has been possible, and it's free. You can go there and see all this stuff because it's very important. And I've got a lot of stuff that I've put on there, which I think is very important. And the average Christian person should understand that the Bible is not a myth, and the promises of Yahweh to save our nations is not a myth. Only if we obey. Look at us now; we can't win in Pakistan. Well, there is a huge problem right now. Thank you very much for your time.